video that I was making yesterday on this series, and I'll refer anyone landing on this that's interested to tap into the video that I just made yesterday in the live stream. And I want to keep running with this, and I want to say sometimes I think when things happen, like say you have a synchronicity, like things line up together, it doesn't mean that it's profound. It doesn't have to be extraordinary because we're profound at all times. This life is profound, and we're connected at all times. So yesterday, I was making a video. I make it a point not to watch the news because I think that I'm much stronger when I'm not aware of what's going on abroad. I learned that from there used to be two elderly ladies I would take care of at the same building. I'm talking about the famous Ravu building, or not famous, but it's in St. Paul. You have the Ravu building near downtown, and that's a subsidized building where all the residents living there have different forms of ailments and illness or old age that makes them receive subsidies and a lot of support, like from the county with different services. So I would frequent that building a lot while I worked as a PCA for anywhere from 5 to 10 different people, but about 2 or 3 I'd go on a regular basis, and I had some really brilliant, beautiful experiences for myself. Caring for other people is a deep thing because sometimes, like you say, you would turn online and you'd say like, where can I go for content about how to make my life better in one area? But sometimes life it's indirect and it's counterintuitive. So if you just allow a window into your life for a certain kind of energy, that can make your life go a lot of ways. So the way that the time I was working as a PCA, I was taking online classes, but also I was air uniting myself by procuring a lot of my own personal library. And I was learning a lot, but I had some of the energy in my life at that time. I would say I would be stable at that time. I wasn't well to do or anything like that, but I was stable. I wasn't hurting, and so I had some really brilliant experiences. But these two ladies that I would serve were exactly opposite in that one of them would always exactly watch the national news networks. She was more liberal leaning, the national liberal news, and then the other woman was more conservative, but she was more local. She would exactly pay attention to local news. She would tell you anything getting ready to happen that week, that day, that month, within the last year, within the next year. She would have her finger exactly on it, and then she would also be watching like things like she would be like, oh, right now, there's something that just happened on the train a few blocks away from here. I need to pray for them right now. So she would be a prayer intercessor warrior. She'd be watching the news in real time and covering people in prayer in real time, but she never got daunted or fatigued by it. But then the other person that I had, I spent more time with her over several years, but she would watch a lot of the national news. But then at a certain point, she got traumatized by it because sometimes trauma is not just something that happens all at once. Sometimes you can have exposure to trauma. Like say you have something like tuberculosis. Like right now, I've been in a lot of venues for like shelters and taking care of people at a hard time. When you get in situations like this, there's not any form of vetting people in terms of like where they're coming from geographically. Say you had a military venue, right, and you had people from all over the country, but all over the United States is probably one of the broadest. Any country that would have a military service, United States is probably one of the broadest geographically in that you could be drawing people from Florida, from New York, from Washington State, from California, from Hawaii, from Alaska, from Minnesota, from Texas. Those are such broad of regions, and you have so much going on. We think that, oh, this land is your land, this land is my land, as though it's just one cohesive current country. But that's how we overlay it now. But it's really a vast continent, and you have so many different pathogens, so many different toxins, so many different nutrients, so many different endemic plants, insects, animals that are dispersed there, even within the current globalism, is that it's very diverse. So if you took that many people and you put them in one cohort, one contingent of people, one swath, one sample like that, you would have a lot going on that you couldn't perceive, like as far as your body and what your body would be inoculated against and be protecting itself against and be inundated or overran with such as that it's a buoyancy, but it's not actually a natural. When you're exposed to that many people from that many different regions, that's not a natural circumstance for a human being, because at all times we're contacting and we're communicating with the environment and all of its members at all times, and we're also transacting with the environment at all times. If you just appreciate your mere breath as one example, but there's probably a lot deeper than that, but that when you're in a vicinity of people, you're contacting one another a lot. So to have that broad, but not also not vetted in any way, that's very difficult for a human body. And there could be a lot that would happen with that. So a lot of times, like, say, if a person, a lot of people would say that, hey man, you've been to boot camp before, but you've never been to war before. No, actually, if you have anything to do with the military, anything, you're already at war, because if you went to boot camp, you could actually be inundated with, like, say, walking pneumonia. You could fall out right there in boot camp and die in boot camp, or you could be standing at attention and you're a newbie and you got your knees locked, you faint, hit your head on the floor, you're a goner. Or you're running, you're training, but also training to run upstairs, because that can happen to you in war. You're running up the stairs now, you trip, you fall, you die like that. Or you go to boot camp, you don't take boot camp seriously, you half-ass that different stuff. Now you're actually in a combat theater, and now you have a habit of being weak or cutting yourself favors like that. Now you're inundated in a combat theater, so there's no actual full stop in life to anything. What's real, what's not, what's street, what's not, what's military, what's not. Life is all just simply real. But all I meant to say is that with just so in a place like where I'm at, you would have a lot of different people that would not be vetted in any way. I a little bit lost that train of thought. But so this lady, she would exactly watch so where I was going is that she taught me a lot of things. Like, she taught me that if you have a Sunday is the first day of the month, then you have a Friday the 13th on your hands. And she taught me that going back in the, like, she's from St. Paul. St. Paul is a traditionally largely a Catholic and Jewish neighborhood. Sorry, you have a lot of Catholic and Jewish influences in St. Paul proper, what's called St. Paul. And so you have a lot of religiosity going back. My mother was like that. She came from the Highland Park area, which was an example of that combination of Jewish and Catholic background. But that's not limited to Highland Park. The whole St. Paul is like that. And then I met a rabbi this summer, and I repeated to him some insights that I had leveled on this channel, and he was impressed by that. He spent some time with me, and he said that likely if you were to take Highland Park in St. Paul, you would have been some intermingling of what and who would be considered Jewish and Catholic, and that at different times in the 1800s and before that, it would have been expedient or not expedient to reveal yourself or associate yourself as being Jewish or Catholic. So there could have been some interplay and some also disguising and disguising of true faith, true allegiance, and then thereby ethnicity like that. But all I meant to say is that this woman, she taught me that going back, I think she would have been more so on the Irish leaning, Irish Catholic, and or maybe German she might have been, but she would appear white Caucasian. But she was telling me that in her day, which would also be like my mother's era, like the baby boomers, early baby boomers generation, your dad is not the same thing as your father in this world. That's a distinction, because a lot of times people, you look at the man who sired you as though he was your efficient cause in this life, your impetus in this life, your creator in this life. And but according to this woman, that's not your true father is deeper than any one person. And so that's not the same thing as your dad. It's not the same thing as your father. But then also I talked to a man, Morris Brooklyn, who's a fellow YouTuber, a greater scholar and YouTuber than I. He does more fact checking, and he's more he's very efficient. And he said that when people say the ancestors, the aesthetic is I pray to the ancestors, that's largely appropriating at least African culture, and it's some of the African culture that's endemic to. I'm not sure exactly which African people, but I think he was referring to somewhat of Southern and Central Africa. That refers to a couple, two to three to several to two severals of your paternal line are your ancestors. Just your so in that way your father is more like your brother, in that you are your father, but also one day you will be your son's father, and your son is also your father. So it's like you are more like brothers, bringing yourself back and forth. But your efficient cause in this life, you're like each other's dads, but your efficient cause in this life is your father is different. But that woman, she would teach me cool things like that. But then she also, but the only thing I mentioned her is that I learned from watching her is that if you, and then also like at that time, that was during the pandemic, and she would be teaching me things about the pandemic, about the mandates. She was well abreast of what was going on with that. But she was more actually politically and current. She was more astute in terms of current affairs by minding local business rather than broader national business. But that too, once broader national trends came local, the national broad trend, you may be weak like that. Not weak, but you may not be in your wheelhouse like that because you'll be dissipated. Anything that's dissipated is weak. That's why yesterday I was referring to, like, me personally, I have a dot that occurs right here, but that's reminiscent of, in India you have the bindi dot, and I think that bindi, that refers to like when a woman has that red dot on her head, that's a bindi dot. That's reminiscent of the blood of the menses. And then bindu, I think that's reminiscent of the male counterpart in the reproductive process. That's the color white. But in the masculine it's bindu, in the feminine it's bindi, but it's an auspicious, that means promising dot when it's in the forehead like that. But a deeper thing than that is that it's, in India, they can appreciate that when things are actually smaller, they're more potent. So the universe itself could be more potent as a bindi or bindu, as a single point, but without a reference. Number and direction and time are meaningless without a reference. So too is size. But a better, a forceful way to say that would be conservation conservation and concentration, because the more dissipated something is, the more lopsided, eccentric, unbalanced it is. Although that can still be profound, is that there's a strength in anything, even in being extended or precarious or eccentric or odd. There can be a brilliance in that, in discovery and creativity in that. But also in India, sometimes the smaller something would be the more potent. And another example of that is in the film Men in Black. Well, I think one of the only times that was introduced into a popular Western culture lexicon, the actual power of something being small, would be like in the film Men in Black. In the film Men in Black, there's a trope not a trope, but there's a theme in there that would have been unique to culture in the mid 90s, and it still hasn't been replicated a lot. And that when they were seeking for the universe, what was symbolic of the universe, but actually had the potence of the universe, it was within the actual medallion that was on the necklace of a cat. That's very, very deep, because cat, if you were to study anything to the finest point, if you were to study military science to the finest point, fighting to the finest point, dancing, a lot of life itself is dancing. And if you understood anything as dancing, you'd be better. Some people would say game theory, and that all things can be broken down as a game, but a game can be confounded and can be stalemate. But dancing is not confounded, because one style, there is no best style of anything but dancing. But if you were to study anything to the finest principle, it'll come down to posture and bearing. And cats have some of the most formidable posture in both mind, body, and spirit. You cannot domesticate a cat the same way that you can domesticate other creatures. And I think that's something of their poise. Their poise is not just whatever it is that allows them to be as supple and svelte. That svelte is like very thin and nimble. Whatever allows a cat to be that svelte and coordinated like that, and also a little bit cunning and subtle and self-possessed and self-content and alone without being lonely, and still vigorous and have enthusiasm while not being daunted by being alone. That's a deeper thing that runs through its existence, so to its mind, in that if you get to the finest point of anything, the principles will bear out and flesh out a lot like a cat. So cats are very profound. In the Middle East, where a lot of our learning comes from the Middle East, for example, we have for numbers, we have the numbers 1 through. A lot of people would say that, okay, so you have the metric system is in Europe, but I'm sorry, I forget what you call the English system, the American system. But either way, when you have the numbers 1 through 10, according to Pre-Algebra for Dummies by Mark Zigarelli, that's the Hindu Arabic numeral system. And I think that Hindu, Arabic, Buddhist, those are a little bit, and then some of your endemic faith practices in Africa, Asia, and Europe, they overlap prior to and probably parallel to the Roman and the Greeks. That's a deeper coherence of a lot of deep seat of learning, some of which we as civilians are privy to access to that information, knowledge. Some of it we're not, because, for example, do you think, if knowledge is power, right? Do you think that there was? I think there would have been something like the Library of Alexandria at least. Do you think? And it's an example of what I'm talking about. So you see the nose of the Sphinx. The nose of the Sphinx is shot off the Sphinx, right? Blatantly. That's an example of fiat. The desecration of the nose of the Sphinx is an example of fiat because it conceals and it changes the nature and the understanding and the blessing that is the beholding of such a relic of history and ingenuity and humanity. But the deeper thing is that if you could actually lay your eyes upon the Sphinx of Egypt before it had been desecrated, you beholding such a thing with the Afrocentric nose features, that would enlighten you to the actual history of not only African people but the earth itself. If you had a coherent grasp of the history of the earth, which is your history, you couldn't be managed and marshaled and relegated and marginalized the same way that you are under fiat. So it would be necessary to do that. If that's a deeper thing of that's probably one of, if you had to make the actual the baseball card or the image, the dictionary picture of oppression, it would be the image of the Sphinx like that, because that's fiat right there. The entire reality that we have now is a fiat structure, and it oppresses people, but that too while retrieving value from people and consecrating and hoarding that value, such that it would be naive to think that they actually destroyed something. If there was something like the Library of Alexandria, that they actually destroyed that. Another example is that I was reading a book about the wizened people of Europe, for lack of a better word, witchcraft, and there would have been different grimoires. You can still buy, like, I there's a grimoire series about guitar that I read, and it has a guitar harmony broken down. It's called the grimoire series. But a lot of people of different faith practices, anything becomes a lot more profound when you put pencil to paper. So that you would have these wise people in Europe that had grimoires like that. But as history is told, they would have been persecuted and burned at the stake and things like that, but not to before retrieving their knowledge, because that knowledge is not worthless. So I read a work. I can't cite the name of that work. That the forces that be now and then that had actually oppressed and chased some of those wise people and put them on their heels, they actually conserved that understanding, and it's still in pristine form. So there's a lot of knowledge that's not available to the general public. But all I'm saying is that the Hindu Arabic numeral system is what we have and what we can do a lot of wonders with, in the symmetry of that. That's based on nothing more than the actual symmetry of our body, which is part of this existence, in that this existence is symmetrical. That's a better word than to say mathematical, because numbers have no actual meaning in themselves, value, but symmetry has life is beautiful, and beauty is a form of is within proportion and symmetry. But what we have for numbers, for counting, is based on our hands, our digits. And so I've said on this channel is that as long as we've been human beings, and probably before that, we've been digital, because we've been on our digits. Digits are your furthest appendages, are your phalanges of your hands. The bones of your hands are called the phalanges, and then the distal, that means furthest phalanges, are like your fingertips, and then the bones of your feet are the tarsos. The distal tarsos are also phalanges. Those are your toes. And we have 10, and our counting is based on that. But some of these people, like in Mesopotamia, I think another word for Egypt would be Haikupta, or Kemet. They actually revered cats, and but the only reason I say that is that for cats are so profound, so that in the film Men in Black, that they would do something about cats, but then also have that medallion like that's reminiscent of the entire universe in its pristine form, in its condensed form. That's a deep principle that they were conveying with that film, and that as above, so below, as is great, so is small. But sometimes what's smaller can be more profound, such that when you pay attention to local news, you may have more of a foothold, is what I was saying with that. So that yesterday I was making a reference on this channel about the military industrial complex, and how some of these phases in human history, such as gangsterism as before, but probably most salient and prominent in the time of prohibition in the speakeasies of the 1930s. Then also soon after that, World War II. These things were deeply traumatic to the human experience. What gangsterism meant for lifestyles, for people imitating gangsterism that also could have heinous outcomes. Then to World War II, in that And then also what I was going on was that is that sometimes trauma is not just a one-time thing. So if you're in a place like space like this, or where you're around a lot of people and they're not vetted like that, you can come in and out. You probably will reveal some form of that your body is going through things. Like right now my nose is running, but for something like say tuberculosis, you don't get it in just one exposure. It actually, you get inoculated to it. It breaks down your body over time. So I actually met someone, I made a friend where I was coming from in Minnesota, and he was just getting past tuberculosis. He had had it a couple times, and he was asking me if he could borrow money for a Seven Up, because he would just like to enjoy a Seven Up. It's been so long since he could hold down food. He could barely. He was subsisting off of fruit for a long time because this was his current round of tuberculosis. But all I'm saying is that tuberculosis, it takes time for it to kick in like that. But so too trauma can be like that, and that trauma is not necessarily just one time like that. It's like a lot of exposure. So if you take trauma, also say racism in the United States, if you're a person of color, when I say a person of color means that you don't have sovereign standing in the eyes of your peers. That's what color means. So color doesn't mean the color of your skin. So too minority. Minority doesn't mean in terms of number. Minor means a minor person, that is a person that's not deemed worthy to read, write, vote, that is hold property, that is make decisions that for themselves. When a person is called a minor, they're saying a person who may not make decisions for themselves, and that too for their community. Because if you choose well for yourself, you choose well for your community. If you can do for yourself, you can do for your community. You can transcend oppression. So colored people doesn't refer to the color of your skin, and that misnomer, that's a snare of connotative linguistics, according to Tashrik Bey, and that could be a cause for further conflict and misunderstanding, that is further oppression, by understanding color as to do with the color of the skin. Then it can have also a connotative meaning where they would say colored people, like in Africa, all the different venues of colonialism. You've had different iterations of racism, and which is caste relegating, and also colorism within that, in different degrees of racism itself is a privilege structure, caste structure, nepotism structure, in-group preference, in-group preference that is biased. And so the stratification of that, the leisure of that, which is power. Leisure is a form of power in standing, and then the delegation of duties. It skews upon many different sophisticated lines, not the least of which color. And then also sometimes outcomes in standing and holding property that is also influenced by color and appearance and perceptual bias. But it has been different in all of the different seats and venues of colonialism, such as like you have different endemic cultures, but also economic rigors and afforded blessings and allotments, such that it breaks down. You couldn't have, say for example, you're in South America, there'd be different crops there'd be different seasons, there'd be different local culture, there'd be different buoyancy in terms of what works and doesn't. So the actual iteration of colonialism and racism and caste would be different there than in America, than Caribbean, than in South Africa. But some things are very similar and interchangeable, such as the iteration of color. So in where I'm from, where my parents are from, or my dad's from in Africa, you'd have the colored people. They understand themselves, and sometimes they're understood as being different than African, than strictly African, than strictly European, and then any particular tribe within that. It's a set unto itself that they can suffer racism, and also they can perpetrate racism. Another example of that is, like, I think in Angola, which is north of Africa, you've had a lot of fighting there over time. I think it's French speaking Angola, and there had been a lot of fighting, fierce fighting about this thing of colorism. Another way to say that would be mulatto, and I think that mulatto can also be a racially charged term that's more endemic to America, and America would understand that as mulatto, but in other cultures they would call it colored, and they can receive racism and perpetrate racism, and so I a little bit lost that train of thought, but so but what I was meaning to say is that trauma, racism, classism, caste, it can have a more brutal effect over time. So if you're so what I'm saying is that a person of color, a colorable person, a person outside of standing in law. They could nowadays and going back, they could have been anyone, and that too could have been women, because in the past, like say in the United States, before what's the word I'm looking for? Before suffrage, women's suffrage, women could be outside of that, and so if so, you would say you wouldn't appreciate a woman in pre suffrage, pre feminine suffrage times in America. You wouldn't appreciate that as colored normally. That may be true if she was well situated in her family or her partner, but you didn't have the same opportunities for dating back then. And then that too, if a situation, just think about now how many people are bogus. You get to know somebody long enough, they're bogus. So if you're living with someone, you're married to someone, if separation is not honored in the eyes of the church, which is the community, how much of suffering could you not have in a domestic situation that's unsolvable? Like you can't resolve that trauma there like that. Or if you must, because sometimes things do come to a head where you must, now you're excommunicated from your family and the community. Would say a child, the child could have as much of backlash as the mother, as what would be called a bastard, when that word really that word is still a heavy word, but in the strict caste designation of the word bastard like that, how rough that could be. That woman therefore and her child would be colorable in the law, and they'd be colored in the law, even though she would be what you call Caucasian. So some of these words like colored and minority, they can be misunderstood, but their misunderstanding is yet another application and function of them. Um, but so a lot but the real force and trauma of racism, it's not only one. Like a lot of times in film, they'll try to show trauma as like this family was all right, and then one time this heinous thing happened to them, and then they know what racism is. But really, racism is a day in, day out thing, but it never stops stinging. Like if someone were to tell, shut up, never sounds cool. No matter how young or old you are, nobody likes to be told shut up, and it stings the same way. Anytime somebody, you're expressing yourself and someone says, hey you, shut up, that hurts at any age like that. So too does racism always hurt like that. But over weeks and months and years and decades of repeating that day in and day out, no day goes by without out some form of racism being reminded to a person. That's very traumatic over time, and that's what a lot of trauma is. It's not just one thing like that. But I'll say that some of these features, these times in our society, the gangsterism of the speakeasies and things like that, of the prohibition and teetotaling, which is saying no to alcohol, and then also World War II. These things are very traumatic, and so we never actually got past it. But also we tend to fetishize our very trauma, because if you imagine a traumatic relationship, usually trauma has two things, right? Because it's oppressive, but you can't get away from it. The reason that you can't get away from a bad relationship trauma is because it's the combination of reward and punishment. That's actually what training is. So if you're actually truly in a traumatic, truly abusive relationship, you're actually trained in it, so you can't get past it, because it is your training to be like that. It still hurts. Even if you're trained for something, it still hurts, but you can't get past your training. And then also you like yourself, you usually like yourself, so you actually like you can't, the bind of trauma is that you can't dispense with the trauma, because the trauma is your training, and you still love yourself, so you can't actually dispense with the trauma without dispensing with yourself as you know yourself, which is your training. So it's that combination of reward and punishment, and that it's mostly punishment, mostly torment, but you get just a little bit of satisfaction and makeup, like stuff like that, a little bit of treating. So that combination of largely punishment, but just a little bit of treating, it makes you so you can't always say, man, that person really is no good for me. That person really doesn't mean me any good like that. Because then they can see that, and then they butter you up like that. That's on a visual level. But then some of the greater things, like say gangsterism, that gangsterism, it never went away. It has a lot of heinous outcomes, but some of it just looks cool. Like if you imagine like Dick Tracy, like with those trench coats and stuff like that, some of those old gangster aesthetics, it looks cool. Some people could probably win in dating with that aesthetic. Money making always seem cool to people. So it actually, you can't really just throw gangsterism all the way out without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So too with like militarism, like World War II, things like that, is that I think that we in World War II in America, America hiked up the entire country to be in line with that it was like a movement. World War II was actually a movement, a production movement. More than the guns and bombs and fighting, it was a movement towards mass production, and it never stopped. But then also, it's not good for us, but we're accustomed to the trappings that come with it. So we've been in that gear. So if you imagine, like right now, like I'm saying is that I normally don't watch local news, but until it comes to my doorstep. So I was today getting some services, and they're saying something about bombing or something like that. And I had just been making a video yesterday about the industrial complex, not knowing that that was occurring yesterday. And I was saying that we're connected at all times, so that would occur to me is just because we're connected in life. And so when something really significant happens in the human experience, someone lost their life in a bombing, something mobilized like that, the entire human experience, living organism that is one life form, I think human beings can feel that, and that might be why it was occurring to me. But I'll say this, that just imagine you had, like, say a month ago, right? So this thing is happening now, but say a month ago, you have, so these people pop up there, right? This pop on the TV, an admiral, right? A Navy admiral, right? They control this many boats and stuff like that, and they know about this many missiles, right? But how far are we from World War II, right? Is that Navy admiral? Is that not anachronistic? That means like reminiscent of another time. Are they not actually reenacting and reliving up to and acting like this is still the 1940s? A lot of the way that the military would conduct itself and understand itself is reminiscent of the 1940s. Like say you were to like go to boot camp, right? Like there's about to be some crucial stuff, some dangerous stuff, right? You go to boot camp in the year 2025, right? When you go into boot camp, they're gonna have you feel like this is about to be World War II, right? You got the camos on and stuff like that. It got you geared up, like thinking like, oh, this is a platoon. We're about to go to World War. Like in World War II, they didn't have smartphones, right? Just imagine everything that happened in World War II, right? That all them soldiers had their own damn smartphone with them like that, right? Now I'm not saying that smartphone even had an app for military or anything, right? They just all had a damn smartphone like that. Would that not change the entire meaning and situation of them being there, and what would be possible and not, and what would have meaning and not? So now in the military, you have like you're in boot camp 2025. It's almost like it might as well be 1940 because we're still living up to it, but it's still bankable to have that mass production like that, but then also think and act like and posture like this had been damn World War II because we're still in the trauma of that, but we're still identified and it's a fetish. So a lot of things, trauma actually become a fetish and a profitable fetish. So too with gangsterism, so too with World War II aesthetics. But would this not be more realistic, right? You are trying to make something dangerous, right? You want to protect your country, right? So you got 100. You just got people from all over the country, right? You put them up together in something called boot camp, right? But you want to make the most dangerous thing to go overseas, right? Would you not be having them? Would you not actually give them smartphones and teach them some treacherous stuff to do with smartphones that didn't have nothing to do with even getting boots on? You could potentially be way more dangerous in 2026 without knowing how to lace up boots because of the technology we have. Imagine this, right? Imagine you had some real smoke on your hands, right? You're in a city, right? Would you rather have some tough guys after you that understand themselves as tough guys that walk around like tough guys, or would you rather have pissed off the local librarian who read this many novels, mystery novels, and she never done nothing bad before, but she got a problem with you. She got an actual problem with you that she's livid. She is beside herself with you, and she doesn't care what it costs her because she's been at this librarian for now, and you just did something to mess up about her retirement or something. She got a pension out for you, right? How much damage could that little old librarian that doesn't seem or look like or assume to look like nothing be to you, another person, if she really had it out bad for you? You got it bad. And she read this many novels and stuff like that. Just a free acting civil person could be way more dangerous than some boots or something like that. So that's an example of how even the military stuff, it's a fetish like that, and it can get beside its purpose like that. Um, and so, but I think that I had more a lot more that I wanted to talk in that vein, but this is already quite a lot of content, so I'm going to walk it back like this. But I think I have more that I can flesh out about this stuff. But a lot of this stuff is just the same posturing, but life is really posture. And one of the strength of cats is that their posture. You know, I wanna actually mention a dream I had last night. I had a dream about Jake Paul last night, just randomly. And one thing I really like about Jake Paul is that he said he did two really cool things in my eyes. Um, he had a fight with the brother of the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, Tommy Fury. He had a fight. No, sorry. Yeah, he had a fight with Tommy Fury a couple years back. And before that fight, he popped up with like a random YouTube video, and he's like, "Hey man, I just want to say, hey, this thing is about to be real, you know. But I just want to say, I put myself on the line just to show you, anyone out there, you listen to me, that anything is possible for you. I used to be this Disney kid, and now I'm up here fighting like that." He's like, "Man, look at this guy, man. This guy Tommy Fury, he's no punk, man. He's no pushover, man. This stuff is dangerous, man. But I want to show you that anything's possible, and you can step up to anything." That was so beautiful that he did that like that. Then another thing is that he said he was talking to somebody, and they're like, he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, everything is freaking fake until it's not." That's the coldest thing, is that about believing in yourself, is that you do something and you look like a joke, or you don't get any kind of fanfare, you don't get any kind of traction, even though you're giving yourself your own traction, your own opportunities like that. And then you're doing things a lot thankless. But at a certain point, it just damn become real like that. So I had this dream of Jake Paul, and he was like, I'm not sure if he was pushing a wheelbarrow, but he was just like looking like he was walking with two belts is what he actually was doing. Like, you know how like they have like a double champ, like in two weight classes. He was he had a wheelbarrow with two different belts, like from two different weight classes, and he just had this look on his face of like, man, this shit just got real, man. Like, another way to say that would be like, imagine you had somebody that was like, they were flirting with something, like, yeah, he was flirting with broken, man, this just got real, man. Like, he had this one video where he had like a mansion. He's like, "Man, I got this mansion and stuff like that, but I'm still about boxing, man." But now he damn near can't even eat. He can't even enjoy food. He got all that money, but he can't even enjoy food like that because he got his jaw broken. But it just got real like that, man. But I want to say commendation, because that's actually an example of realness right there. Is that you mess with this thing this long, and then damn, I got a wheelbarrow, and there's two belts in here, and I'm the double champ. And he was actually taking those belts to go face his brother in my dream. He had a damn two belts like that, and then he was gonna go square off with his brother so he could all the way get his own nuts and not have to explain himself to nobody about nothing. Not his belt, not his family line, to nobody, not even big, not even bro and them. Just so he was just like walking like, "Hey man, this thing just got real, man. I don't know what this is. It's real." That's a dream I had like that. So I hope that anybody watching this, I hope that you do your thing until things get real like that. But another example is that like I actually began that video yesterday talking about how if you do something long enough, it become real. So like I've been doing this channel about standing up to the status quo, but also talking a lot. And I think that there's some kind of relationship between the coherence of your life and your engagement on social media, where I think that the more you would spend time on social media, there's symmetrically, proportionally, functionally some reciprocity between life outcomes and the coherence and control and decision making you have in your life, and also who you are and who you appear to be based on your contact with social media. And YouTube itself is social media. I don't engage social media unless there's a learning purpose, because I'm the kind of person where I can't be idle somewhere just strictly for the sake of socializing, because I'm too polarizing to be somewhere just to socialize like that. So I'll be on YouTube because I have the auspices and ostensibly about learning, and this channel is about learning and sharing inspiration for learning and from learning. But I could say that a lot of my life became untenable, crazy, wild, but also more like myself once I did the channel. And anytime you talk, you put a lot of energy out as you talk. So I'm talking a lot on social media, a lot, and my life has followed suit. And some of that, there are some outcomes with that are less than glamorous, such as what I'm experiencing now. But I think that it pushes you on towards more of being yourself, because you're holding yourself accountable by making public statements. You could be called to the carpet for that. But then also, the more you do that and be compelled to do that, the more you get truer, closer to your authentic self and your true vocation and calling in this world, which is your best standpoint in this world. And I think if you do anything outside of your vocation, it's a matter of time until that goes bust, because it's your destiny to find your vocation. So anything will it will make you closer to your vocation. But the more truer you can be and courageous you can be, the sooner you can find your vocation and enjoy it more. So the one thing is that we shall find our vocation, if there is something as destiny. But the stronger we get to enjoy it, and the sooner would be, the more honest we are with ourselves and others, which is the same thing. And so this channel has been like that. But I'm saying is that also you can say it's posturing, because statements are also posturing. Like a lot of people be like, man, why does anybody care what you say? Because you can get a lot of smoke online for saying the right wrong thing, right? Why does anybody care about the sounds that you make out your mouth? Because when you make a sound, when you make a word out your mouth, you're taking a posture. Your entire existence is connected to that, because your livelihood, your family, your friends, your opportunities, your possessions, your some of your abilities, they can all be affected by the posture you would make verbally. So talking is actually posturing, and a lot of people don't like posturing. Like if you were to go up to someone and you're like, someone could here, look at the difference between this. Those are two different postures, but those postures are communicating, and communication has reverberation. So anybody would have to respond to your posturing, because your reverberations affect them. So statements online are postures. But what I was saying yesterday is that if you posture as anything long enough, you can posture as anything you want to an extent, to begin with. But once, after a while, that will take traction and click in, kind of like tuberculosis setting in or something like that. If you Once you do it enough, and then once it's locked in, you must abide within that until you transcend what you must abide through. So I made this channel in the vein and venue of speaking truth to power. So now life is in different ways holding me to account for that, and it's cost me actually it cost me family members. Then after that, resources, because like for example, I lost a brand new motorcycle because of fallout, kind of some of the trajectory of offending my family member, and then being jilted by that family member when I had otherwise been in the area. And that matter of one step like that, it cost me the actual bike like that. And you could say that's a function of this channel and statements I made, and posturing. But the deeper thing is that, just like Jake Paul, is that if you posture as anything long enough, it become real. So like Jake Paul says that, yeah, this person is pretending until they're not. This person is a wannabe until they're not. Um, but so too is that the way you would do anything strong. Like when I was on my way here, I was in Colorado, and randomly on my feed there's a picture of a slave being sold in America in the times past, and this man, he had some wounds on him, and he was being sold as what you'd call chattel. When they say stock market, that's referring to human stock, labor, and human livestock, and that's still the same today. Is because our efforts and our possessions that's connected to our efforts and our vitality and our labor is traded on the stock market the same way as in times past. So we're still actually chattel as in the times past, but because of some of the innovations like the cotton gin and technology, it's not as blatant, and there's a little bit more of wiggle room and more things to enjoy and afford, but we're actually still existing as chattel. But this man, when they show a picture of this man, is that he's completely not broken. He has wounds on him and he's being sold, but his posture is so incredible, it's so formidable. But you can imagine if you actually had been sustaining rigors your whole life like that, back-breaking toil since you could remember talking, you, or at least duty and rigor and chores, cumbersome chores, rigorous taxing chores since you can remember, within to strenuous labor, manful labor since you were of the youngest age. To survive that, the only way to do that, to both survive the reproof and the chastisement of your overseers and your peers, which are also a form of overseers, the rigors themselves, to be viable, is that it demands the strictest strength, which is a function of posture first and foremost, and in the second and last place, all of weight bearing and challenge is a matter of posture, and probably improvisation on top of that, which is another more sublime aspect of posture, is improvisation with discipline and intelligence. And so you saw that in this person's posture like that. But cats also are some of the most formidable of postures, and probably one of the strongest beings, I would imagine, just in terms of strict posture. The posture of a big cat or a small cat, they're completely formidable. So a lot of things, posturing matters. And so like right now, like what they're doing with the fighting and stuff like that, it's a function of posturing, but it's not fake because it's posturing, but it's still actually posturing. You can understand it better as posturing, and like a little bit of a fetish, and a profitable game, and mayhem, and banking off the mayhem, and however this thing would go, there are people that would stand to make money hand over fist, and those people are probably have have a hand in prompting it, sustaining it, and then coming over it, upon it, through it, as being better for it, would be the powers that be. The powers that play, those that be, are still at play, and banking like that. But I'm gonna sign off with this one. I hope this can be of value, but I'm gonna come in with some more of this vein in the next day or so. Some Evan Kevin said hi. Some cool characters like that. I'm not sure if you're from Asia. And said hi. What's up? You have a pretty avatar. Thanks for anyone for checking me out. Peace out.